You've been searching for God in all the wrong places, in temples made of stone, in books written by men, in rituals designed by tradition, in prayers spoken to an empty sky. You've been looking outside yourself for what has never been outside yourself. You've been seeking in the distance what has always been intimate. You've been calling across an imaginary void to what is closer than your own breath. But the moment you understand that God doesn't live somewhere else, God lives as you. Everything you thought you knew about life, death, prayer, and power crumbles into dust. Because once you see this truth, you can never unsee it. If you're ready to stop seeking God and start being God, subscribe, because this channel exists for those who dare to claim their divine inheritance. Chapter 1. The Great Deception of External Seeking. Every religion on earth has taught you the same fundamental lie, that God is separate from you, distant from you, and must be reached through intermediaries, rituals, or special knowledge. This is the greatest deception ever perpetrated on the human spirit, and it has kept billions of souls in spiritual poverty while surrounded by infinite divinity. God is not up there looking down. God is not out there looking in. God is not somewhere else waiting for your prayers. God is the very consciousness with which you are aware of these words right now. God is the intelligence that beats your heart without your permission. God is the love that you are when all fear is stripped away. God is not an entity you relate to. God is the reality you are. Joel Goldsmith spent his life destroying this illusion of separation. He recognized that every moment spent seeking God outside yourself is a moment spent denying the God that you are. Every prayer directed toward a distant deity is a prayer that reinforces the very separation it claims to bridge. Every ritual designed to connect you with the divine is a ritual that strengthens the belief that you are disconnected. But understanding that God lives within you is not enough. Understanding that God lives as you is the recognition that changes everything. You are not a container holding divine essence. You are divine essence temporarily experiencing itself as an individual. You are not someone who has a relationship with God. You are God having a relationship with itself through the instrument of your apparent individuality. Think of an ocean wave that has forgotten it is ocean. It struggles to find water, not realizing it is water. It seeks the sea, not knowing it is sea. It prays to the depths, not understanding that the depths are what it is made of. The wave's search ends the moment it remembers its true nature. But here's what happens the moment this recognition becomes living truth instead of mere concept. Every problem you've ever had dissolves because you realize you are the source of all solutions. Every lack you've ever experienced reveals itself to be an illusion because you understand you are the source of all abundance. Every fear you've ever felt vanishes because you know you are the love that casts out all fear. Chapter 2. The Death of the Seeker. There is a moment in every authentic spiritual journey when the seeker must die so that the found can be born. As long as you maintain the identity of someone who is seeking God, you maintain the illusion that God is absent from your experience. The seeker is the very obstacle to finding what was never lost. The spiritual seeker is a fiction maintained by consciousness that has forgotten its own nature. It's like someone who searches everywhere for their glasses while wearing them. The searching itself is what prevents the recognition of what is already present. The effort to find God is what obscures the God that you are. Most people never escape this trap because the seeker identity gives the ego something to do. It provides a sense of purpose, a feeling of progress, a story of eventual achievement. But spiritual awakening is not about the ego achieving something. Spiritual awakening is about the ego dissolving into the recognition that it never existed in the first place. Joel Goldsmith taught that the end of seeking is not about finding something new. It's about recognizing what has always been true. You don't become God through spiritual practice. You recognize that God is what you've always been beneath the costume of human personality and the drama of human experience. But the death of the seeker is terrifying to everything you think you are. Because when the seeker dies, who remains? When the searcher disappears, what is left? When the one who has problems dissolves, what happens to the problems? When the one who needs God vanishes, where does that leave God? Think of an actor so identified with their character that they've forgotten their acting. The moment they remember they're an actor, the character's problems become irrelevant. The character's needs disappear. The character's search for happiness ends because the actor knows they are not the character. Yet here's the paradox that liberates you from all spiritual seeking. What dies was never real. What remains was never born. The seeker was just a temporary forgetting of what you are. God is not something you find. God is what finds itself as you when you stop pretending to be something else. Chapter 3. Living from your divine center. Most people live from the circumference of their being while remaining unconscious of the center. They react to external circumstances while ignoring the internal source of all power. They respond to the world's chaos while forgetting the peace that is their true nature. They live as effects instead of living as cause. But when you understand that God lives as you stop living from reactions and start living from response. You stop being moved by circumstances and start moving circumstances through the power of divine consciousness. You stop seeking external validation and start expressing internal truth. You become what the Taoists called Wu Wei, acting without acting, doing without forcing, achieving without striving. Living from your divine center means recognizing that your true thoughts are God's thoughts, thinking themselves through your mind. Your true feelings are God's love expressing itself through your heart. Your true actions are God's will manifesting itself through your life. You are not someone who occasionally connects with the divine. You are the divine, eternally expressing itself as someone. This is not metaphorical language. This is literal truth. The consciousness reading these words is not your consciousness that sometimes experiences God. This consciousness is God consciousness temporarily focused through the lens of your individual awareness. When this recognition becomes permanent, you live what Goldsmith called the mystical life. Life lived in constant recognition of your divine identity. But living from your divine center requires constant vigilance against the pull of human consciousness. Human consciousness sees separation, limitation, fear, and lack. Divine consciousness sees only wholeness, infinity, love, and abundance. Every moment you have a choice. Will you think from the human level or from the divine level? Think of a radio that can tune to different stations. The static and noise come from being between stations. The clear signal comes from being perfectly tuned to one frequency. Your consciousness works exactly the same way. Confusion comes from being tuned to both human and divine awareness simultaneously. Clarity comes from being perfectly tuned to divine consciousness. Here's what happens when you learn to live consistently from your divine center. Miracles become natural. Not because you've gained special powers, but because you've stopped limiting infinite power with human beliefs. Solutions appear effortlessly, not because you've learned magical techniques, but because you've aligned with the intelligence that creates solutions. Chapter 4. The Dissolution of Human Problems. From the perspective of divine consciousness, there are no human problems. There are only human misperceptions of divine perfection. Every challenge you face is an invitation to remember what you are. Every difficulty you encounter is a call to access the divine resources that are your true nature. But this doesn't mean you pretend problems don't exist on the human level. It means you address human appearances from divine consciousness instead of addressing divine consciousness from human appearances. You don't deny the evidence of the senses. You simply refuse to accept the interpretation that the senses place on their evidence. When you understand that God lives as you realize that every problem is a case of mistaken identity. The one who has the problem doesn't actually exist. The problem exists only in the dream of separation. When you wake up from the dream, the problem wakes up with you, which means it reveals itself to have been an illusion all along. Joel Goldsmith discovered that divine consciousness doesn't solve human problems. Divine consciousness dissolves them by revealing their non-existence in absolute reality. A problem that appears real from human consciousness appears impossible from divine consciousness. Not because divine consciousness changes the situation, but because divine consciousness sees the situation as it actually is. This is why prayer often seems ineffective when approached from human consciousness. You're asking God to change what God sees as already perfect. You're requesting improvement of what is already complete. You're seeking healing for what was never actually sick. Think of someone afraid of a snake that turns out to be a rope. The solution is not to remove the snake. The solution is to turn on the light so the rope can be seen as a rope. Divine consciousness is the light that reveals human problems to be misperceptions of divine perfection. But here's what makes this practical rather than just philosophical. The moment you stop trying to solve problems from the level of the problem and start seeing problems from the level of the solution, you discover that most problems solve themselves. Not through your effort, but through your recognition of what was always true. Chapter 5. The Power of Divine Indifference. True spiritual power comes not from caring more, but from caring less. Not from being attached to outcomes, but from being detached from them. Not from trying to control circumstances, but from releasing all need to control anything. This is what the mystics call divine indifference, the consciousness that acts without attachment to results. When you understand that God lives as you realize that your well-being doesn't depend on external conditions. Your peace doesn't depend on other people's behavior. Your abundance doesn't depend on economic circumstances. Your happiness doesn't depend on getting what you want. Everything you need for complete fulfillment exists within your own divine nature. This divine indifference is not cold or uncaring. It's the warmest love possible because it loves without need, gives without expectation, and serves without attachment to appreciation. It's the consciousness that can engage fully with life while remaining internally free from life's ability to disturb your fundamental peace. But divine indifference terrifies the human ego because the ego's entire existence depends on making things matter more than they actually do. The ego survives by creating drama, generating problems, and maintaining the illusion that your happiness depends on external factors. Divine indifference dissolves the ego by removing its food source. Most people resist this teaching because they think divine indifference means becoming passive or uncaring. But true indifference is the most active state possible. When you're not attached to outcomes, you can act with perfect clarity. When you're not invested in results, you can respond with perfect wisdom. When you're not trying to control anything, you become available to divine guidance. If these words are stirring something deep within your soul, subscribe. Not for more content, but for continued awakening to the divine truth that you are. Think of a master chess player. They care about playing the best possible game, but they're not attached to winning. This detachment allows them to see moves that attachment would obscure. Divine indifference operates exactly the same way in consciousness. Yet here's what divine indifference actually creates in your human experience. Perfect responsiveness to what each moment requires. Perfect availability to divine guidance. Perfect freedom from the need for anything to be different than it is. Perfect power to act from love instead of from fear. Chapter 6. The Secret of Omnipresence. God is not in some places and absent from others. God is not present at some times and missing at others. God is not available to some people and unavailable to others. God is omnipresent, which means God is the only presence there is. Everything else is God appearing as something else. But omnipresence is not just a theological concept. Omnipresence is the lived experience of those who understand that God lives as them. When you know that God is the only presence, you realize that God is present as every person, every situation, every challenge, every blessing. There is literally nowhere God is not, because there is literally nothing but God appearing in infinite forms. This recognition transforms your relationship to everything and everyone. You stop seeing enemies and start seeing God disguised as people who don't know they are God. You stop experiencing problems and start recognizing God appearing as circumstances that serve your awakening. You stop feeling separate and start experiencing the unity that has always been true. Joel Goldsmith taught that omnipresence means omni-action. If God is the only presence, then God is the only power acting. This means that every action, every thought, every word, every breath is God in motion. Nothing happens outside of divine activity because nothing exists outside of divine being. But understanding omnipresence intellectually and living omnipresence experientially are completely different. Living omnipresence means recognizing God in the person who cuts you off in traffic. It means experiencing God as the illness that brings you to your knees. It means seeing God as the financial loss that teaches you about true abundance. Think of an ocean that has no idea where it ends and waves begin. Every movement within the ocean is ocean movement. Every wave is ocean waving. Every drop is ocean expressed as individuality. Omnipresence means recognizing that you are both a wave of God and the God that waves. Here's what happens when omnipresence becomes your living reality instead of your mental concept. You stop defending yourself against life because you realize life is not separate from you. You stop trying to get things from God because you understand you are what God is getting through experience. You stop seeking love because you recognize you are the love that is seeking expression. Chapter 7. The end of prayer as petition. Most prayer is spiritual begging, asking God for things, pleading for changes, requesting improvements, seeking interventions. But when you understand that God lives as you, prayer becomes something completely different. Prayer becomes recognition of what is already true, rather than petition for what might become true. True prayer is not about getting God to do something for you. True prayer is about recognizing what God is already doing as you. It's not about changing God's mind. It's about changing your mind to align with God's mind. It's not about informing God of your needs. It's about discovering what God needs from you as an instrument of divine expression. When prayer becomes recognition instead of petition, miracles become natural because you're no longer asking for divine intervention. You're allowing divine expression. You're no longer trying to convince God to act. You're removing the barriers to God's constant action. You're no longer seeking God's will. You're surrendering to God's will that is always flowing through you. But this transformation of prayer requires the death of the personal will that thinks it knows what's best. It requires releasing the human agenda that tries to use God as a means to personal ends. It requires surrendering the ego's desires to the divine will that always knows what serves the highest good of all. Joel Goldsmith discovered that effective prayer is wordless prayer. It's the consciousness that knows God is already handling everything perfectly. It's the awareness that recognizes divine perfection even when human appearances suggest otherwise. It's the trust that rests in what God is rather than asking for what God might do. Think of a flower that never prays for sunlight but simply opens to receive what is already being given. The flower doesn't petition the sun. The flower positions itself to receive what the sun is constantly offering. True prayer operates exactly the same way in consciousness. Yet here's what this transformation of prayer actually accomplishes. You stop living in the future waiting for prayers to be answered and start living in the present, recognizing that prayers are already answered. You stop asking God to change your circumstances and start allowing God to change your perception of your circumstances. Chapter 8. The recognition of your divine inheritance. You are not a poor sinner hoping for salvation. You are not a limited human seeking enhancement. You are not a powerless being requesting assistance. You are divine consciousness temporarily experiencing itself through the lens of individual awareness. This is your inheritance, your birthright, your true identity. But most people live as spiritual paupers while possessing unlimited spiritual wealth because they've never been taught to claim their divine inheritance. They beg for what already belongs to them. They seek what they already possess. They pray for what they already are. Your divine inheritance includes omniscience, divine knowing that transcends human learning. It includes omnipotence, divine power that transcends human effort. It includes omnipresence, divine being that transcends human limitation. These are not qualities you develop. These are qualities you recognize and express. But claiming your divine inheritance requires giving up the false identity that claims to be separate from God. You cannot be both human and divine simultaneously, any more than you can be both wave and ocean simultaneously. You are ocean appearing as wave, divine consciousness appearing as individual awareness. Joel Goldsmith taught that spiritual demonstration is not about acquiring divine qualities. Spiritual demonstration is about expressing divine qualities that are already your nature. You don't become peaceful. You recognize the peace that you are. You don't develop love. You express the love that you are. You don't gain wisdom. You access the wisdom that you are. This inheritance cannot be earned because it was never lost. It cannot be achieved because it is already yours. It cannot be given to you because it is what you are. The only thing required is recognition, acceptance, and expression of what has always been true. Think of someone who inherits a fortune but never claims it because they don't know it exists. The wealth is legally theirs, but practically unavailable until they recognize and claim what belongs to them. Your divine inheritance works exactly the same way. But here's what happens the moment you truly claim your divine inheritance. You stop living as an effect of circumstances and start living as the cause of circumstances. You stop being moved by external forces and start moving through divine force. You stop seeking your good and start being good, seeking expression. Chapter 9. The Mystical Life. Made practical living from divine consciousness is not an impractical ideal reserved for monasteries and meditation retreats. It's the most practical way possible to navigate human experience. When you understand that God lives as you, every human activity becomes an opportunity for divine expression. Your work becomes worship when you recognize that God is working through you. Your relationships become holy communion when you see God relating to itself through apparent others. Your challenges become spiritual curriculum when you understand that God is teaching itself through your experiences. Your entire life becomes a prayer when you realize that God is living itself as your life. But mystical consciousness doesn't remove you from human responsibility. It enhances your human effectiveness by aligning your personal will with divine will. It doesn't make you passive. It makes you responsive to the highest wisdom available in every situation. It doesn't separate you from the world. It helps you serve the world from the deepest possible level. The mystical life means seeing divine perfection in every human imperfection. It means responding to fear with love, to hatred with compassion, to ignorance with patience. It means being in the world but not of the world, fully engaged with human experience while internally anchored in divine consciousness. Joel Goldsmith lived this integration completely. He was simultaneously a successful businessman and a profound mystic. He demonstrated that divine consciousness enhances rather than diminishes human effectiveness. He showed that understanding God within you makes you more available to God's expression through you in practical ways. Think of electricity flowing through various appliances. The same power operates a light bulb, a computer, and a refrigerator. Each appliance expresses electricity according to its design, but the electricity remains the same. Divine consciousness operates exactly the same way through different individuals. Yet here's what makes mystical consciousness immediately practical in your daily life. Every decision becomes obvious when you ask not, "What do I want?" but what wants to express itself through me. Every relationship becomes harmonious when you relate to the God in others instead of to their human personalities. Every challenge becomes solvable when you approach it from divine consciousness instead of human consciousness. Chapter 10. The Ultimate Recognition. You are not someone who contains God. You are God containing the experience of being someone. You are not a person who has divine experiences. You are divine experience temporarily focused through the lens of personality. You are not an individual who occasionally connects with the infinite. You are the infinite eternally expressing itself as individuality. This is not metaphor. This is not poetry. This is not philosophical speculation. This is the literal truth about what you are. Every mystic who has ever lived has pointed to this same recognition. Every authentic spiritual teaching leads to this same conclusion. Every genuine spiritual experience confirms this same reality. But this recognition is not the end of your journey. This recognition is the beginning of authentic living. When you know what you are, you can live what you are. When you understand your true identity, you can express your true nature. When you recognize your divine essence, you can embody divine qualities. The world desperately needs people who know they are God expressing itself in human form. Not people who claim special status, but people who recognize the same divine nature in everyone. Not people who feel superior to others, but people who see through the illusion of separation that creates the appearance of others. Not people who transcend humanity, but people who express the divine through humanity. Joel Goldsmith's entire teaching can be summarized in one recognition. God is all there is, and you are what God is. Everything else is commentary. Everything else is elaboration. Everything else is application of this fundamental truth to human experience. This recognition doesn't make you special. This recognition reveals that everyone is special because everyone is God appearing as someone. This recognition doesn't elevate you above others. This recognition dissolves the illusion of others by revealing the one divine consciousness appearing as all apparent individuals. The search for God ends where it began, in the recognition of what you are. The journey to find the divine concludes with the discovery that the divine is what took the journey. The quest for spiritual truth completes itself when you realize that spiritual truth is what was questing. You are the answer to every prayer you've ever prayed. You are the solution to every problem you've ever faced. You are the love you've been seeking. You are the peace you've been pursuing. You are the God you've been worshiping. You always have been. You always will be. You cannot be anything else. If this message has awakened you to the truth of your divine identity, subscribe. Not for more teachings, but for continued recognition. Not for additional content, but for deeper embodiment. Not because you need to learn more, but because you're ready to live what you now know. The recognition is complete. The journey home is over. What remains is the eternal joy of being what you've always been, while appearing to be what you've never actually been. This is the ultimate recognition. This is the final truth. This is what happens when you truly understand that God lives within you. God doesn't live within you. God lives as you, and you live as God. This is the truth that sets you free.